As a lot of you guys may know, after middle school, life tends to start to get harder. You have all these high school and college classes such as calculus, physics, anatomy, biology, chemistry. So how in the world are you to balance all these things and maintain a good grade? This is exactly where Ph.D. psychologist Edwin Locke comes into play. With this fantastic book, Study Methods of Motivation, Edwin Locke paves the way for high schoolers and college students to study effectively and retain their motivation for doing so. In this video, I'm going to be interviewing Edwin Locke on his book. So if you're a high school student or a college student, you might want to stay to the end of the video because you might pick up something that you didn't know. Stay tuned. We're here with Ph.D. psychologist Edwin A. Locke. We're going to be talking about his book, Study Methods of Motivation. He's going to provide a case as to why someone should actually get the book. But more importantly, the benefits that comes with it. If I remember correctly, you received your BA in Harvard and then your PhD in Cornell University. Am I correct?
No. Well, yes, but I also got a master's and PhD from Cornell.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then you're also one of the developers of the goal setting theory and the prime mover theory.
Well, the goal setting theory was developed by me and Professor Gary Latham at the University of Toronto over a 50-year period. And so we know a lot about the subject, and it was mainly meant to apply to business because we need, people need to know how to motivate their subordinates to get results. So that was the main focus of our work.
Okay. So that's kind of the general introduction, but I want to start with the book overall. So just like we just said before, besides the title of the book, which is self-explanatory, Study Methods of Motivation, could you give a brief rundown of the overall meaning of the book in what its purpose is?
Okay, well, starting with part one, which is study methods. The first thing we talk about is what do you need to do when you're reading? And it's not just moving your eyes across the page. And the important thing is to integrate the meaning of the words, which requires a lot of mental focus, in your own words, and not just repeat the abstraction. So not just a mindless definition, but putting the concept in your own words so that it integrates with all of your other knowledge. So we call that abstract integrative reading, which is not just grasping abstractions, but connecting the abstractions to your other knowledge. So that's much more proactive than simply rereading the text, which doesn't accomplish very much. So that's two chapters. And then when you read, of course, a textbook is full of thousands and thousands of words. You can't memorize them all no matter what method you use. So how do you indicate what's important? And we found that in psychology, students' favorite activity was taking the yellow marker and just marking stuff and doing it page by page, just marking stuff. And there was no understanding of how you choose to mark stuff because you can't mark most of it. Otherwise, why bother to do any of it? So how do you pick out what's important versus what's not important? And that involves more processing. What are the fundamentals here? What are the non-fundamentals? And even writing small notes in the margin in your own words to call attention to a particular thing you underline. So in lecture note taking, in a later research project, a student of mine did a study where he found that when you're taking lecture notes, it's crucial whether you put down stuff that's not on the blackboard. The more you put down of stuff that's not on the blackboard, the higher your grade. What you did of stuff on the blackboard is completely irrelevant. Why? Because if you do only stuff on the blackboard, you're missing 90% of the subject matter. So the key is to put down the essentials. So it's kind of like underlying what are the essentials of the things that are not on the blackboard that are in the lecture notes. So it's the same principle of designating what's important. So that was the next part. The next part is memory. You're not going to memorize very much unless you're one of these gifted people who has eidetic memory. If you just reread. So you have to pick out the important points, as I talked about, but you have to program into your memory by rehearsing them. So let's say there's 3 causes of the Industrial Revolution, and you read them and you underline them. You got to test yourself by going back and say, okay, without looking, what are the 3 factors in the Industrial Revolution? To prove you can bring those back from memory without looking at the text. So programming through integration. And then there's mnemonic devices in another chapter help you recall things. So the memory was the next topic covered, and including, and then we had physical context of the study. Do your studying where you're not interrupted, and be very careful of group study, that you can get immersed in group discussion and lose track of the reading. Time management, be sure to set the amount of time you actually need alone and away from other things. And then we had another chapter on lecture notes, which I just talked about. And then preparing for exams, which will be taking all of your underlines and your lecture notes and making a list of study points of the most likely things that might be tested for the exam, and then rehearsing those. And then study monitoring, the last section of that, last chapter in that section is beware of what your mind is doing, because conceptual knowledge isn't automatic. So your mind, when you read, may be wandering. And I give this example that I've used hundreds of times. Imagine you're reading a page of text, which students do all the time, and you get to the bottom of the page, and you say, if you're monitoring, you say to yourself, I have no idea what I just read. I don't know anything that's on that page. So you were looking at the word, printed words, which is sense perception, but you weren't integrating the meaning of the words. So in order to fix that, you got to go back and start over. What does this sentence, this word, this paragraph actually mean in terms of my own understanding and my own concepts? So that's what's covered in the study methods section.
You want to go over the motivation section as well?
Okay. Okay. Why you go to college? Now it's a little bit trickier now because college itself is so bad intellectually in many ways, including being taught garbage and being taught left-wing propaganda and mindless professors who read their lectures same as they've done 25 years ago, and blah, blah, blah. So you need to have a reason for going to college, and really the main reason is to get your certificate, because it affects your ability to get hired. Not that you can't get work without a degree. You can, but it may be held against you you don't have a college degree by many employers, even though they don't know what you learned. Even if you learn nothing important, that degree can make a difference in credentials. But it has to be selfish choice, not to please your parents, not to do it because all your classmates are doing it, because it's important for you personally. Here's an example from graduate school. Lots of students go to law school because all their classmates are going to law school. Probably the most popular graduate program. But most of them don't like law at all, and they're sorry they got into it because they didn't pick it from the point of view of what they really liked. So you need to go for the sheepskin. You need to go for learning what might be interesting. The best courses in college nowadays will be the hard sciences, not so much the others, but you might find exceptionally good professors in other fields. Sorry, you were.
No, you're fine. So I mean, I've noticed that, and I think I explained to you this previously. I've noticed the effects of the book towards me, right? I remember that there was a multitude of times in which I read Ito, particularly the analytic synthetic dichotomy, and
That's hard.
and I did exactly what you said not to do in the book, which is people mistake underlining for understanding.
Mm-hmm.
And if I go back there, there's tons of sections I underline. It's like, oh, that's a cool point, and then I'll move on and stuff like that. But after a while, I could not, say the concepts, the meaning of the analytic synthetic, dichotomy, especially when I get in a conversation and someone's talking about, logical necessity and stuff like that, and I try to, retort back. I don't have the content there. But once I finally applied your book towards it, underlining properly, bracketing certain areas, and then doing the marginalia, I came back and I was like, wow, I feel like I've integrated so much information that I didn't even know that was there previously. I even applied the test taking section in there, or the studying section in there, particularly for anatomy tests. I've only had about like an hour and a half, and I scored a 95 on an anatomy test.
Right.
I didn't study. I find the effects of this book is so amazing, especially if you apply yourself. But what I want to touch on here is that it seems like the book kind of tries to understand what consciousness is, what is our nature, how does our brain operate, and try to identify a study method that conforms to that, so we can properly learn the way that we should do. And I would like to ask you, what was the conditions that made you want to write this book, for the people who are curious? What were the conditions? What did you experience? What did you observe? What gave rise to the book?
I mean, before I get into that, analytic synthetic dichotomy is an extremely difficult article. And I've found ways of just essentializing it in a couple of sentences, which is fine for my usage, because I don't get into debates with philosophers in philosophy journals. But if somebody wants to say 2 + 2 = 4 is just because you defined it that way, because you made it come out that way. And I answer, say, look, imagine you have 4 stones on the table, and you say 2 and 2 is 4, and you say, okay, if I put these 2 with these 2, it's this number, and I can put a label on it, but it's based on reality. I could have used other numbers besides 4. I could have used 2 + 2 is glop, but it would have been equally valid. And 2 + 3 is gloppenmenger, and 2 + 5 is glush. It doesn't matter as long as you stick to it and you're communicating with the same words. But the basis for even the simplest thing is observation of reality. So I don't think I'd be able to get into want to get into a philosophy article with people who disagree with it. But I think I can get to the point of saying 2 and 2 is 4 is starts with sense perception, and you're conceptualizing, connecting by removing the objects and abstracting out the content, all of the objects, and integrating it into a new concept, namely 4, 5, 6. And that's all you need to know to defend the idea that math is based on reality. It's based on reality. Okay, so that's as far as I even want to go with a person arguing. So, so back to your question, I wrote the book because, as I mentioned earlier, students had no idea how to study, didn't know the methodology. So that was why study methods was the core of the book, 13 chapters, what was required to do it.
You want to kind of give some examples of how students were approaching you in not knowing how to study, and in your kind of response to those students?
Yeah, I said, how did you study? I reread the chapter. I said, is that all you did? Yeah. I said, well, that's completely inadequate. Let me go over the steps that you didn't follow. And that's the chapters in my book. They didn't follow conceptual integration. They didn't follow how to designate what's important by thinking, not just by using the yellow marker. They didn't spend time programming memory. They didn't study in a private place. They didn't set the appropriate amount of time. They didn't know how to take lecture notes. They didn't have a plan for preparing for exams. So all the things that I mentioned, that was my motivation.
And what was the research process coming to all the conclusions that you place in your book? How was the research in the sense of what type of people were you working with? Were there any type of combatants that disagreed with you wholeheartedly?
No, it was just
certain
informal discussions with students, and then my own knowledge from my own experience.
So there wasn't like major sources that you went to. It was just more of an integration of observing the students,
yeah,
and then kind of integrating
objectivism and introspection. What did I do? Because I was a good student. What did I do that they didn't do? And my ex-wife was a Montessori teacher, so she helped me a lot in because she was dealing with younger people, but the issue of what it means to grasp concepts.
So let me. I don't think I know what year. What year did this book come out?
I think it came out in the 70s. ARI first with a publisher, 1975 by Springer, and then ARI Second Renaissance republished in 1998.
Okay, so I'm asking because I know you have a personal connection with Rand. Back in the 60s, I have the Objectivist Forum. There's certain articles from you in there as well. How did your connection with Rand and your experience with her influence you informationally towards the book? How did you integrate objectivism with this?
Well, it wasn't my personal connection because I only met her, I think, twice. Once in her her nonfiction writing course, and then another time, a couple of paper conferences. That was all. I didn't have years and years and years of contact like Harry Bindwanger did and Peacock did. So what I was integrating was epistemology, which was what's a concept and how to relate it to percepts. That was my main connection. So it was application of objectivism to a practical field.
So if I could try to understand the book, it is just mostly well, I wouldn't say mostly, it is the application of the objectivist epistemology to identifying how our brain works, how consciousness is, and then using that to identify the proper study methods for learning.
Yeah, and objectivism doesn't have a long discussion of how to study. I mean, that's an application. Uh, you know, so this is applying their basic ideas to a particular field. So when you apply objectivism to the real world, you can't just deduce from the philosophy. That would be rationalism. So you have to connect it to concretes in the real world. Okay. So I can't say, if you're an objectivist and you want to study it, say, okay, if I'm an objectivist, I'd say, read ITOE and focus. That's true. It's not enough. You have to go into concrete details and procedures. So remember that objectivism isn't a substitute for science and dealing with everyday reality. Not a substitute for leadership in business. Okay, go found a great company and make millions, and have a vision and have integrity and use your focus well. True, there's a lot more to it than that. Okay, so you have to take the abstractions and apply them to concrete reality by dealing with the concretes. Goal setting theory was very important for me to have objectivism as a base for goal setting theory. Did not present the content of goal setting theory. I had to discover that. But I knew concepts, I knew free will, I knew the nature of definitions, I knew something about induction. But I had to develop goal setting theory myself.
Have you ever read Ayn Rand's Marginalia?
Yes, not in a while.
Not in a while. What did you take from it? Because did you take any like new principle of how Ayn Rand particularly did her Marginalia?
I don't think so. I mean, of course, in my book is Marginalia for students, but Ayn Rand's mind was so far ahead of mine that I mean, she could see things that I never would have seen. I remember when AOI released her edits of Anthem from the first edition, and she edited it extensively for the new edition. I could not understand any reason why she did that. Any of them. Said, no, the first one was good. Why was this better? I have no idea. But I trust her to know more than me.
So I would say like the final thing.
I want to go over one more thing. Very important.
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
I didn't bring up another reason why I wrote this book. People would come to me and say, I knew this stuff, and then I got anxious. And that's why I failed the test. So I questioned them further about what they knew and how they said. I found out the test anxiety wasn't what they thought at all. Test anxiety was due to ignorance, not freezing up. There was nothing to freeze up. They didn't know what they were talking about. That's why they froze. I had a student I talked about with this, and she was a very anxious person. And I talked about, don't worry about the anxiety, worry about the material. So she took the exam. She was in my intro psych course. I said, how'd it go? She said, I was terrified the whole time. And I said, how'd you do? 95 out of 100. I said, because you knew the material, right? Yes, I knew the material. So a lot of what people call test anxiety is ignorance and the failure to partially automatize the knowledge. The same as sports. You want a person to be a good offensive lineman, you don't give a blackboard diagram. If that, do this, if that, do this, if that, do this. They couldn't possibly hold that in mind when they get on the field. So you'd have to practice on the field the concrete things you should do as an offensive lineman when the defense does X, Y, and Z, and A, B, and C to get it partially automatized. So that's what studying does. So this, I found a revelation to me and a revelation to the students.
I just thought of a new question before we can get to the final part. Um, how do you today still continue to use study methods, the discoveries that you found in study methods and motivation, and how do you apply it to your life today?
I don't have to use the book because I already know that stuff. Okay. I don't have to, I mean, I reread it occasionally, but I don't have to study it again because it's all in my head. And of course, well, my context is different. I'm not studying for an exam.
Mm.
The only place I have to use it a lot is as you age, you've got to take driver's tests every few years to keep your license.
Mm-hmm.
And the book on rules of the road is very long. And they put in trick questions, and you got to know a lot. So I've got to use the study skills to try to automatize as much as I can. They still will use dirty tricks sometimes, completely bizarre questions, but you have to pass or you don't get your license renewed. But otherwise, I'm reading solely for my own edification, and I'll take notes only on, like, reading the Wall Street Journal editorials, some of which are good, some of which are terrible. I'll take notes on something that might be important if I want to write a letter to the editor. But I don't have to memorize or take a test on the editorial.
And for the last part, if you were given a spotlight, and the spotlight is either 30 seconds or to a minute, right? And the question asked to you is that you have the book in front of you, and you're talking to all the high school and the college students. What is your 30-second dash to a minute, 1 minute take to the world? What can this book do to you? Do for you?
I think it will show you the methodology for studying, which most students do not have any idea of, and it hurts their performance. So I'd focus on part one mainly. It said successful studies requires a process. There are several aspects of the process. If you don't use these processes, you're not going to do well. So that's what I'd do. And I'd also mention the most important thing from study motivation section. I said test anxiety is not due to anxiety. Poor performance is not due to anxiety. It's due to ignorance. I don't think you can excuse your poor performance because you were nervous. If you've done the right study procedures and processes, typically anxiety will not be a problem for you. That's what I would say.
And I know I didn't mention it in the beginning, but again, Dr. Locke here is also an author. I will definitely link your Amazon, some of your books down in the link to the description. Do you want anything else linked? Your website? I will link that too.
Website and also the book on determinism, free will book.
Yeah, which is right here.
Yeah.
I will also link the Ayn Rand e-store with some of your lectures down there below as well, if they want to continue to keep updated with your work. Also, I'll probably link some of your essays that you've done on Capitalist Magazine and stuff like that.
Yeah, the Capitalist Magazine ones are very good for many, many current event issues that people, because what you get in the papers for current events is completely hopeless.
Well, I'm hoping you enjoyed yourself here.
I did.
On the interview.
Yeah.
Pori will officially be the first YouTube channel to host Study Methods and Motivation, and it's such an honor to do so as well. So thank you, Dr. Locke, for being a part of this, and hopefully we'll have some discussion in the future on a particular topic. Maybe we'll probably discuss about this one after I read it.
Good.
Thank you.